Clark.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and good morning. I thank the committee for their attention to this matter, and I obviously welcome the outcome that the committee has recommended that the House authorise the Speaker to take steps to ensure that the interests of the House are represented in Registered Clubs Association of New South Wales versus Stoltz, such that parliamentary proceedings are appropriately protected as provided under the Parliamentary Privileges Act 1986. Obviously, I support the motion. I hope it will have the support of all members of the House. Deputy Speaker, I think it would be fair to say that all parliamentarians in Canberra, in fact parliamentarians in parliaments right around the country and indeed even overseas in Commonwealth countries, will be very grateful for the increased clarity that this episode promises to bring to the issue of parliamentary privilege. There are precious few precedents and precious little case law in Commonwealth parliaments around the issue of parliamentary privilege, which possibly helps to explain why we're needing to clear things up right now. Perfectly clear, though, Deputy Speaker, is that the protection of communications between the community and parliamentarians is vitally important, especially when those communications are directly related to the work of the parliamentarian in the parliament. And of course, that's what this is all about. That's the origin of why we're standing in the parliament discussing this motion today. This is all to do with a gentleman from New South Wales called Mr. Troy Stoltz, a brave gentleman, I would hasten to add, Deputy Speaker. Mr. Stoltz is a former Clubs New South Wales employee, and he got in contact with me in late 2019 and was in regular contact with me for some time after that, or with my office, I should say more accurately. During that interaction, Mr. Stoltz provided me with documents obtained in connection with his employment at Clubs New South Wales, and in particular a board paper detailing how the vast majority of registered Clubs in New South Wales were not, or at least were not, complying with anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing legislation. And this was contained in a Clubs New South Wales board paper. This was hard evidence, widespread non-compliance in New South Wales registered clubs with very important federal legislation designed to rein in and stamp out money laundering and terrorism financing. Mr. Stoltz came to me with the express intention of trying to get me, or seeking to get me, to ventilate these concerns and to present that hard evidence in the Parliament. And that I did. And in fact, in early 2020, I stood in the House and I ventilated this information and I sought to table the board paper that Mr. Stoltz had provided me with. In other words, there is an unambiguous and direct link from his approach to me doing my work in the Parliament. Of course, Clubs New South Wales have subsequently taken legal action against Mr. Stoltz, and the federal court has ruled that the communications between Mr. Stoltz and me may be used as evidence in the court case. And this, of course, is what I dispute. This is why I referred the matter to the House, and this is the matter that now is the substance of this motion before the House. Deputy Speaker, there are obviously so many alarming dimensions to this whole issue about Mr. Stoltz and the quite frankly, the threat to parliamentary privilege, not just in the House of Representatives, but to the threat to parliamentary privilege that would come from an adverse precedent here in parliaments right around Australia and right around Commonwealth countries. Let's remember the powers and protections that are in place under the Privileges Act to enable the Parliament to carry out its functions properly, including debating matters of importance freely, discussing grievances and discussing investigations effectively without interference from the government, the courts or anyone else. And this is important, Deputy Speaker. This matters, and we must be very careful not to allow any precedent to be established to diminish these very important protections. And if the Parliament does not seek to intervene in some way in the current matter of Clubs New South Wales versus Stoltz, then there is a very real risk that parliamentary privilege will be diminished in some way. But even more broadly than what we need to do our job, what the parliament needs to function effectively, the protections afforded by parliamentary privilege are actually needed by the public. I mean, it's not their privilege, but it has the effect of protecting people in the parliament to ventilate important issues when they would otherwise be voiceless. And in particular, whistleblowers like Mr. Stoltz. I mean, let's not forget the substantive matter here, Deputy Speaker. The substantive matter is not that Troy Stoltz gave me a board paper from Clubs New South Wales. The substantive matter, and is still, as far as I'm aware, uninvestigated matter by federal authorities, including AUSTRAC, is that almost all registered clubs in New South Wales are, or at least were, not complying with anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing legislation, and that the Clubs New South Wales peak body was effectively running a protection racket for them and is still trying to run a protection racket for them right now by trying to silence and destroy Mr. Stoltz in the federal court. I mean, this is the substantive matter. That should be what everyone's running around and should be on the front of the newspapers. And the issue of parliamentary privilege should be just taken for granted, and we shouldn't be needing to take this action, but of course we are. And of course, this isn't the first time, Deputy Speaker, that I have come into the Parliament informed directly by brave whistleblowers and brought to the public's attention issues of great public importance. In cases where the whistleblowers had nowhere else to turn, where in the case of Crown, where whistleblowers had tried to get traction with Victoria Police, with the Victorian Gambling Regulator, with AUSTRAC, with Federal Police, with Border Force, with anyone else who might have some jurisdiction. But in the end, it was left to them to come to me and for me to stand up in the Parliament and to with the absolute privilege that I do enjoy in the Parliament, to ventilate those concerns. That's one of the few reasons why Crown Casino is in such strife at the moment. That I had a group of poker machine technicians come to me in 2017 and give me hard evidence of misconduct at Crown, including money laundering, poker machine tampering, domestic violence, gun running, and I was able to table a USB in the Parliament with their recorded testimonies. More recently, a brave whistleblower came to me to talk about what was going on at the private terminal at Tullamarine, how aircraft were coming in, with some foreign national for a weekend at Crown Casino in Melbourne with 15 bags, and heavens knows what was in those bags, presumably cash to be launched through Crown Casino. More recently, it was only because of a brave Victorian gambling regulator that I was able to reveal and again attempted to table in the Parliament the video footage of an Aldi shopping bag with a couple of $1 million in it being money laundered in the Sun City junket room at Crown Casino. Now, I don't rehash all of this history, Deputy Speaker, to big note myself. I do it to honour the brave whistleblowers who have come to members of Parliament with their concerns in the public interest, and those approaches have led directly to the work of parliamentarians in the Parliament, an unbroken chain from approach, discussion, handover material, MP stands up and ventilates it in the Parliament, in the public interest, protected by the absolute privilege of the Privileges Act. And that's what we're here today, Deputy Speaker, to defend, to hopefully pass this motion, authorise the Speaker to somehow intervene in Clubs New South Wales versus Stoltz, to have that the communications with me to be not allowed to be used in that case, and to set a very powerful precedent for all parliaments of the Commonwealth right around not just the country but around the world, that parliamentary privilege is real, it's powerful, it's effective, and it will be used to protect the Parliament and to protect the functioning of the Parliament. Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker.
Oh, I thank